Poonam. Welcome to Unblur the Path. For you to say that word, problem solving.
The biggest thing was asking for help. I am a lead technical advisor. I have a background in systems engineering, chemical engineering. When you're in your career, you're working so hard, achieved so much in my career, but what more can I do?
What was your experience, emotions towards applying to the university that you wanted?
Chemical engineering isn't just the engineering. It's the whole process that goes around it, which includes the people, the plant, the process, the product.
If you can think about the skills that you might have picked up, which helped you, navigate through this whole course.
I think the biggest thing was asking for help.
How it was winning Miss Asia Empress Prime UK Queen in 2026.
Gosh, yes, I'm the pageant queen. One thing that chemical engineering in the first year that taught me was that we're a team. I actually went into chocolate. So I worked for Cadbury's in Birmingham as a project engineer. When I was at university, I didn't really have LinkedIn, but I think it's quite important. I've told a lot of the industrial placement students that I've managed that get LinkedIn now because you're building your connections and network. Engineers have this amazing skill of solving problems. And when you go into the finance industry, they love engineers. The consulting industry, they love engineers because we have this mechanism of solving problems.
What do a nuclear industry leader and a beauty pageant winner have in common? Meet Poonam Gehlot, a chemical engineer, STEM advocate, and a newly crowned Miss Asia Empress UK 2026. Poonam's story challenges stereotypes and proves that success doesn't have to fit into a single box. Let's unblur her path. But a heartfelt request. Please subscribe to the channel. If you support my efforts, appreciate the guests I bring, then your subscription will enable me to bring more guests. And if you are even happier with me, please click on the thanks button and you'll know what I mean. Hi, Poonam. Welcome to Unblur the Path. I'm so privileged to have you today. I can't even express in words, but it would be an honor to speak with you today and learn from you how it was winning Miss Asia Empress Prime UK Queen in 2026.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I'm so excited for our conversation. Gosh, yes, I'm the pageant queen now. So yes, it's been an incredible journey through that. So yeah.
Wonderful, Poonam. The first question, and a very natural question, is how was that moment when it was announced that you were the winner?
You have a flood of, just a flood of memories that come back to you. It's a really surreal moment, actually. All the times that, maybe you've been on stage or maybe you've been speaking to people and you've realized I've just overcome a whole massive fear of mine. And for me, that was it. I'd unlocked, I went towards a fear and I overcame it. And that's kind of what I felt. So there was a whole load of emotions, seeing my family there with me as well, watching them see me, with that crowning moment as well was such a privilege. And I also realized with that as well that, there's a beautiful responsibility there, where I'm advocating for women in STEM, but also, the pageant itself was, to empower women and for confidence, intelligence, social impact. So, Tushita Roy, she built this platform to empower women of any age, any size, any height to, everyone has a story. So she made that platform for us to essentially share to the world who we are and our true selves. And I really got to my truth, I think, through that.
Oh, wonderful. And before I forget, let me just tell you, you're looking very, very beautiful.
Thank you so much.
And what was your journey like? I'm sure it is a very interesting journey. Let me take you back in time. I know there's a story and I briefly know about it, but I would want you to first tell us, besides the beauty pageant, what do you work as currently?
So I am a lead technical advisor. I have a background in kind of systems engineering, chemical engineering. So what I do on a day-to-day is more from that engineering management side of things. So more at that strategic level now. So you look at a very big program of work or projects and you put the strategic engineering technical thinking behind it. You know, how are you going to solve this complex problem, but from a strategic point of view. So it's not just the technical, but you're looking at it from different aspects, from that kind of human aspect, the finances, the commercial, and that side of things, and pulling that all together with the technical and the solution to that problem. And that's where I'm at.
Oh, wonderful. And it's very difficult for me to understand while you're working on such a technical side of things and, uh, your day to day life is very different. When and how did you think that, okay, let me just apply for this beauty pageant and, just try a new area? When and how that did that happen?
Gosh, well, I'll have to take you back to last year and even probably the year before that. I was, when you're in your career, you're working so hard, you're pushing and pushing and pushing, and you're like, wow, I've, achieved so much in my career. This is what I've grown up doing, the studying and everything. It's resulted in that hard work
Mm.
to keep pushing and doing and achieving in your work. There comes a point where you're like, okay, right, I'm in a wonderful place at work and I'm making a difference, to the world, and I'm making an impact. But what more can I do? And what can I put myself through? A little bit of, that discomfort as well.
Mhm.
And you get to a point where you're quite comfortable. So you're like, right, okay, for me, the discomfort was actually being visible, and a visible South Asian woman, particularly from the background that I'm in terms of work is predominantly male as well. And there was that desire of exploring that, we can be ambitious women, but we can be multifaceted as well. We can have that desire to love fashion and designer wear and that kind of thing, and have that femininity, that arts side of us as well.
Yes.
And so, I thought, okay, why not volunteer? I'll volunteer for this in the background, help out in the background. And then, Tushita, she said, what are you doing in the background? If you want to help people, you have to put yourself forward first. And she said, come on, Poonam, put yourself forward for this pageant, because you will find yourself through it. You'll get to your truth and then your voice will come out, that voice, that presence as well. And boy, has it done that.
That's wonderful. So we'll talk more about the pageant in detail. The 2 years that you have invested in, preparing for it, for the competition, and everything around it. We'll definitely discuss it, and because I'm very, very curious about it. But I'll take you back in time now, and I would
Yes.
want to know, when you were a teenager or even younger, if that happened then, how did you think about the studies that you want to do, the university subjects that you want to take, or which field should I be, focusing on my future? Was there any trigger in your head or any kind of, reason why you chose chemical engineering and a STEM field?
That's a very, very good question. And, there's so much that goes in your mind when you go back in time as well. So I'll try and articulate that in the best way possible, because there's so much that goes on when you're a teenager. You're thinking about what your friends are doing. You're thinking about, what are my parents kind of doing? And you have, parents do have that influence in terms of, what you want to do, but there's also that openness. And I think what I loved about kind of being in those years was that it was more about, okay, Poonam, just study and go for what you enjoy or what you're good at. And I think from my perspective, I knew I was pretty good at maths. I really enjoyed maths. It's quite logical. There's a right and wrong answer, and I liked that. And I think there was this people aspect of things as well. So funnily enough, I firstly thought I will be a doctor. That's great. And I like the subjects. And then as you go through the years, you're like, oh, well, I'm not so good at biology, but I'm quite good at physics and maths. Oh, that's quite good. And that's quite sound. Oh, but I like some of the business aspects of things as well. So there are lots of little moments where, seeing that actually I enjoy this, I like doing this. And we're all South Asian as well. And there's that element of what's going to bring me some money as well, you
Literally?
know?
Yeah.
And as a teenager, that comes across your mind as well. And particularly seeing my parents work, you know, two jobs each, trying to put me through school and whatnot. I was like, no, this is quite important. And then slowly I started moving to, oh, I might do economics because I like maths and do that. And I saw my brother doing that too. So he was an influence as well. So then it slowly transitioned to, I saw my brother's friend doing chemical engineering. And then you see, okay, I got some work experience quite early on as well. So that was very interesting because that was in the chemical engineering field. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. I can pull in a lot of different things here, the chemistry side, the maths as well. So that's how it wasn't one particular thing. It was just various things and that journey of just understanding what I enjoyed.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so wonderful to know. How organically a thought process builds in our head, multiple reasons, multiple factors kind of influence our thinking, even as young as a teenager, right? And
Absolutely.
we start developing that understanding. So it's wonderful to know how you came to that. Tell me a little bit more about your school and how did you choose the subjects once you've decided that you want to be a chemical engineer and you already knew that maths and physics were your subjects, you were good at them. Was there any other subject that comes in combination with these in your GCSE levels, in your A levels, which kind of, pushes you in the right direction for pursuing chemical engineering?
Yeah, obviously, we mentioned the chemistry as well. So, physics, chemistry, maths.
Yes.
And then with that, actually, I did business studies. And so during GCSEs, there was business studies. And that gave me actually quite a good overview from that interest in business as well. And it now relates to what I do currently in terms of that strategic thinking. You think about the finances, when you have a project, how much am I going to spend or how am I going to run this as a project? What's the profit and loss and all of those sorts of things that you learn in business studies. And so I think that was quite a key element to understanding that chemical engineering isn't just the engineering. It's the whole process that goes around it, which includes the people, the plant, the process, the product, and how do you market that and whatnot.
Okay, so business studies did help you, if not initially, but in the later stages of your career.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we go to the process of applying to universities, how did that go for you? What was your experience, emotions, steps towards applying to the university that you wanted?
Yes. So that's a very interesting question. And I think loads of people will find this useful. Was that actually what happened was that I didn't get into my first two choices of university. And so I had to go through clearing. And loads of people think that, oh my gosh, I didn't make it into that university. What am I going to do? But I actually truly believe like everything kind of does happen for a reason. So when I was doing my applying for universities, I wanted to be in London. So there was Imperial College and there was University College London as well. And so with that process, we had the personal statement as well. So that, that is quite a big part of who you are, what you want to do. And it's quite forward thinking in that, what impact do you want to bring to the world? And I found that was what was kind of what my school said to me that, what do you want to do with this when you go and do that degree? And obviously then there is that interview process as well, or those open days that you go to. So I went to lots of open days as well. And I think it is important to do that because there are different types as well in terms of the vibes of the university. So some are more city-like, some are more campus. And I think it's quite important, if there are people who are watching this who are in sixth form about to be picking, actually listen to yourself when you're talking about the universities or ask your friends, like, how was I talking about this particular university compared to this particular university? And the reason I say that is because I then went to Loughborough University and a lot of my friends, when they said, oh, that's great that you're going there, they said, Poonam, you were talking like you were enjoying Loughborough University so much, when you went to go see it on the open day and everything, it just makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you really need to look out for is where do you get that? Although there might be, Imperial College and, they're very high ranking, but so is Loughborough University. It doesn't mean, for engineering, they're amazing. So it's just seeing that actually where are you getting that excitement? Because then that is the perfect fit.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And you made a very important point here that, that first gut feel when you go to certain university or a place or a school for that, even for school, we need to assess what made us click. If it was there was a vibe that made us feel happy about it. And so in
Yes,
your case, as you mentioned, the university, if you were talking enthusiastically about that university and liking the vibe of that, it will come across in your conversations and your friends
exactly.
could pick it up. And that's a very important tip for any listener that we have and who's approaching the phase of university
Yes.
selection. So thank you for sharing that. So once you were in the university, how was your life like? How long was the course? How was your first year, most importantly, because that's when you do something different from what you've been doing for the past few years. So how was your
Yes.
first year to start?
Yeah, first year was great. Obviously, I said I went through clearing. So, there's that accommodation side of things that you've not picked before. So, there's that element of uncertainty of where am I going to be? Who am I going to be with? But the university was really good in terms of they got you the accommodation. And then afterwards, you can, if there's spaces or people haven't come to the university, there are always kind of slots that they can put you into the university halls as well. So I think that's really important for anyone that goes through the same journey as me in that first year. And then I think the other part of it is, you've moved away from home, you've moved away from parents, that time then is up to you how you do things. What time you get up, what time you get to lectures, it's all on you. There's no kind of, parent to drive you there and whatnot. So you really become, it's that self-leadership that actually comes in. And I don't think anyone at that time obviously thinks about that. But I think if we term that now, and I think it should be something that does get taught in schools around that self-leadership, because only then you can kind of start achieving. So that's what I started finding. And you start making loads of friends. You have your course friends, and those are probably going to be the most important friends that you have during your university life, particularly from a chemical engineering point of view, because we had a lot of contact time with our lecturers. So when I mean contact time, I mean up to 24 hours of lectures in a week, compared to some subjects where they might have like 10 hours and then they would have reading weeks, say, because they needed to there was lots of reading for them. We didn't actually have reading weeks. We just had lectures and labs. So I think that's quite important to put out from an engineering point of view. And then obviously with university life, it's just the same, similar to work life, where you have your course time and you're doing your work there, but there's also plenty of time for socializing and obviously being part of the vast number of societies there as well. And that was quite an important part for me as well. Getting to know other people outside of just my chemical engineering was a big part.
Okay. And if you can reflect back and think about the skills that you might have picked up in the initial few months or the first year, which helped you, navigate through this whole course.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was asking for help. And I think the biggest thing around the course is everyone thinks, when you're at school, you're going to go and sit down and do an exam, or you're going to go and sit down and it's your own work.
Yeah.
I think one thing that chemical engineering in the first year that taught me was that actually we're a team. So when you did your lab work, you would be partnered with someone. It was both of your responsibilities to do the work. And if you did some of the work and your partner did some of the work, you're both going to do really well. Similarly, if there was some coursework, we would all actually sit together and try to understand it. And I think that was quite an important part, because that actually reflects what true working life is like.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that I learned in that first year was, really work with your peers.
Yeah.
Everyone, there might be someone who's really good at some mathematics problem, but then you might be quite good on some of the business aspects that we had to learn, or the social kind of presentation skills. And I think that was quite important there.
Okay. That's interesting insight. So moving on from your first year to, your further years, how was the journey like? How were the introduction of new subjects? Did you find any subject that was difficult to you, if at all? I mean, that subject may not be difficult to someone else, but how you approach the problem is important to know. So if
Yes.
that was a situation that ever came to you, or if there was a challenge that you ever faced in the next years, how was it dealt with?
Yeah. So I think one thing that I think everyone would find useful is that at university, sometimes, depending on which university, but the pass marks are sometimes can be like 40%,
Okay.
right? You don't always need to get the highest marks or, really get to that 80% or something. 40% is a pass, and then a pass is a pass kind of thing. Yes, it does influence. So, I actually, in my first year, I found one of the subjects really difficult. It was process balances, a very chemical engineering subject where you have to think about the chemistry side of things and the math side of things, something that I thought I was pretty strong at. But for some reason, this brain didn't understand it completely, even asking my peers. And I thought, okay, I really want to get like a 2-1 in my first year. But that one subject made me just get a 2-2. And so I was like, I was really disappointed. And I saw that it was 40%. So I think it was, about 40%. So I just passed it. But I said, oh, can I not do it again?
Right.
So I can kind of, retake it and improve it. So then I've got the 2-1. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. And I wasn't allowed to because I had passed it. And I think that's quite important to know, because even though you've passed, it does still kind of impact. And that was my first year. And most people say that their first year doesn't count. And I think in some cases it doesn't. For me, it did count because when I went through clearing, I was on the Bachelor of Engineering course. If I'd got a 2-1, I would have been able to get onto the Master of Engineering. However, I failed on that side of things.
Okay.
But it was actually okay in the end. So, and I think that's important to understand, that there are lots of options. So even though I didn't get onto the MEng side of things, I was still able to go and do a master's after I finished my undergraduate. So after I finished my BEng, I was able to apply for an MSc, and it was pretty much the same sort of course.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are always options if you don't make it the way you want to make it. It's more important to understand that, don't beat yourself up if, you've slipped somewhere or something didn't happen according to your liking or what you wanted.
Yes.
So I absolutely like that attitude. So once, you are done with the course, 4 years of course, socializing, studying, one question that comes to my mind is, was it a difficult course? Did you see people dropping out? Did you see people not liking what they were doing? Were there challenges that they were not able to overcome? If not you, in your peers, did you see that there was a kind of stress around you? Just to understand.
I don't think I saw anyone stressed about it. I think with the course that we were on, if I remember correctly, I think there were a handful of people that decided to change from, say, chemical engineering to mechanical. Some wanted to change. Actually, interestingly enough, I remember one person decided to stop doing the MEng course, just do the BEng, only do it for 3 years, because he then wanted to go into medicine. And by doing the 3 years in chemical engineering, actually did count towards some of the, I think from the medical perspective, he was able to kind of do, although it was still a long process because medicine is, but those years were still counted to a certain aspect. So I think that's quite important to understand. But other than that, I saw most people actually stayed, and it was actually very nice to see and feel that as well. So I don't know if that's very unique to chemical engineering, or even, the vibe of the university and the peers kind of getting along with each other.
It also depends, as you've rightly pointed, it also depends on the university. If they have made an environment of learning, if they have kind of made it easy for topics that can go difficult, if they have the right professors to make the subjects interesting, that helps. That definitely helps. Poonam, just if you can tell me, how long was your course?
Okay, so it was 4 years.
Okay.
And so first year we talked about, you go straight into your second year. And then during the second year, actually, there's that option to actually take a placement year.
Okay.
And many of my peers and myself included, we decided to do our placement year. So most typically they might call it a sandwich year. I think my university called it a diploma in industry. So we actually got a diploma by taking a year out. And people did all sorts of things. Someone went to Australia to work for a chemical engineering firm out there. Some went into petrochemicals, and I actually went into chocolate. So I worked for Cadbury's in Birmingham as a project engineer, and that was an incredible experience. I think it's probably one of the biggest experiences that you would have as part of, being in a university course, being able to go out and do that. And the process to get there as well is obviously, you're having to do interviews and try those out, and whether there's also assessment centers, because you're competing with people from other universities. So it really gives you that experience of what going out into the real world is going to be like in terms of interviews. So having that so early on and part of your university course is incredible. And then, I went into Cadbury's and got interviewed, and you go into this big building. It's not quite like Charlie in the Chocolate Factory, but there was a little bit of that. And so working as a project engineer there, you get all the experiences in terms of not only the technical, but, working with other people, collaborating with people, the safety aspects that, as chemical engineers, we have to consider, even though it's food, food is what people are consuming inside of them. So the PPE, so the protective equipment that we have to wear, personal protective equipment, all of that, you start learning on the job, essentially, and also meeting other people from other universities. It builds your network that way as well. Yeah. That was incredible. Wow. And then you go into obviously your final year. The final year is pretty intense. Obviously, it counts for a lot. And we also have a project at the end of it, which is a team project. And part of essentially, it's a team project where you are building something, so a distillation column or something like that, or it's a whole process. So, you're working with people, but you're also in that, we're actually marking each other as well. So there's a peer mark in that. And so I think it's quite important to understand that, working with others, like I was saying, the collaboration right from the first year, you're actually marked on that later on as well. And also, I forgot to mention about a dissertation. Okay. So as part of the sandwich year, we were told to do a dissertation as well. So mine was on chocolate, and many other people did it on the work that they did during that. So that all counts towards the university kind of degree as such. So lots of things that happen.
What I'm very curious to know at this point is two questions. One, how do you get into a placement company? How do you apply? What is the process? Does the university help you acquire that, or do you do it on your own? Secondly, what are the fields a chemical engineer can go into? Like you very briefly mentioned that chocolate, petrochemicals. What are those other fields that opens up for you to work in if you're a chemical engineer? So,
So first question, the university does help. So they'll have options. I mean, sometimes the companies will come to the university, and if you've provided your CV and what you're doing, so even though we've not had much experience, the CV is still important. So all the things that maybe you did extracurricular after school and things, that all does count, and they look at that, and then obviously including your first year and second year, some of the marks there as well. So the university will bring some of the companies there, and they'll do a couple of interviews. Other than that, there are also loads of options online. So just typically how you would normally go online and look for a job, a lot of the companies will have like industrial placement job vacancies, and they usually come up around kind of September, October time, just in the new year, because then they start doing the interviews probably towards the end of the year and beginning of the new year. So if you think about September to September. So I think that's quite important. And I think these days now it's quite important. Obviously, LinkedIn. I know when I was at university, I didn't really have LinkedIn, because you think, oh, I'll just get it afterwards. I'll get it after I finish university. But I think it's quite important. I've told a lot of the industrial placement students that I've managed that, just get LinkedIn now, because you're building your connections and network now. So just get onto it and add each other, at university. So I think that's important, because you'll start seeing different companies. And then in terms of your second question, I love that question because there's so much that you can go into. So you can go into a number of things. So obviously already mentioned food in terms of Cadbury's, and there's all aspects of it. So, one of my managers, this is crazy, but he worked for Mars, and Mars do dog food. So, you can work in that area. And then you think about other aspects. So the company that I worked for, which was Cadbury's, they were owned by Mondelez. They did cheeses and, all sorts of snacks and goodies like that. So there's a whole market, and they're kind of fast moving consumer goods. So
Right.
FMCG.
Yeah.
And then when you look at the other side, I had a friend that actually went and worked for L'Oreal. And you think about makeup, you think about the liquids, the lipsticks that they make, all the foundations, the powders. There is a chemical engineer, a process engineer is what they call them in industry, that's working on those as well to make them in vast quantities. And obviously working with the scientists, but then making it on a large scale is what the chemical engineers do. And I think that's quite an exciting area. And then when you kind of break out to that, you can think about, shampoos, conditioners, body washes, toothpaste, so there's all the various toothpaste brands as well. So that's pretty good. What else can you go into? Fertilizers. And then when you kind of look at it in the long term, there's all the fertilizers, paints as well. So I can probably go on, and you can start building and branching out of all of those as well.
Yes.
So it's so vast out of that. And I think it's not to mention, obviously, it's the industry that I'm in, which I've forgotten to mention, is the nuclear industry as well. So energy, so not only petrochemicals, but that kind of energy area as well. So I kind of went into nuclear, and then you have like the defense side of things as well. So defense has a lot of processes that they need to do. And like I said, you kind of think of it maybe from a strategic point of view as well. So there's all of those aspects as well.
Amazing. I can actually, while you were speaking and mentioning the industries, I was myself imagining, there's so many industries chemical engineers can go and work in, because every product that we use today, I mean, so many products, that's wrong to mention every, but so many products today have that, the chemical side of it, which probably requires that kind of research, that kind of work. And as you said, make in volume. The insights can be provided by a chemical engineer. So yes, that's so amazing. And it opens so many fields for any student who's looking up to going and working as a chemical engineer. And so many industries open up for you.
Yes. And I think one thing to add there is that, a lot of my peers, they didn't only just go into those fields. So I think it's worth saying that you don't have to go into those typical kind of chemical engineering or process engineering environments, because they actually went into consulting or into the finance industry. And the reason I'm saying that is because engineers have this amazing skill of solving problems. And when you go into the finance industry, they love engineers. The consulting industry, they love engineers because we have this mechanism of solving problems for other people and things. So it doesn't have to just be that technical chemical engineering process. It actually fits into a lot of other areas if you wanted to.
Absolutely. No, thank you for mentioning that. I myself am an engineer, and I was waiting for you to say that word, problem solving. Yes, that's one topmost skill all engineers can associate themselves with, that we are good at problem solving. So yeah, perfect. So once you're done with your 4-year course, and you're almost at the end of it, what was your most challenging part?
Well, the biggest thing was that most people, when they are in chemical engineering, they want to go into petrochemicals and that aspect of things. So the funny thing that happened, I don't know if it's a funny thing, but what happened was when I finished university, there was actually a downturn in the oil and gas market. So a lot of process engineers were being made redundant. And so that was probably the biggest challenge, because the people who had gone and done their placements in the petrochemical kind of companies, they almost were able to quite easily go back because they'd agreed. But I wasn't keen to go back into the chocolate industry. I had that, and I thought actually I want to do something a little bit more complex. Not that chocolate isn't complex. There is that element, but there's just something that is quite impactful. And I think that was probably the biggest challenge. And so when I came out of university, I actually didn't have a job for a year. And even though I was applying, I went to assessment centers, and there was the water industry. Actually, that's one thing that I didn't mention. You can go into the water industry, and they all had like assessment centers, but it's so competitive. And particularly with the downturn in the market in that oil and gas sector, there were a lot of people going for all the other industries. So it does make it harder. And that's where I think the contacts that you have already made during university years, or parents that might have contacts, brothers, siblings, if they have contacts, it can really help, because that's what helped me in terms of that year that I didn't have a job. I was actually able to reach out to my brother's friend, who was already doing chemical engineering, was a process engineer, and put me in touch with someone to say, do you want to do some contracting? And contracting as a technical scribe, doing kind of hazard and operability studies. And so that allowed me to get some experience, even though, it was a very short experience. It also allowed me to travel. So I went to Germany and Poland for those pieces of work as well.
No, perfect. I mean, that's a great tip that one, have your LinkedIn built, have your networking done or while you're in the university, so that it can come handy. You never know when networks can come handy to you. And
Absolutely.
secondly, of course, tap your personal networks as well, so that if there is a situation like this, people can come here and help you come out of this. So yeah, of course, the next question would be, how is it getting your first salary? How does it feel? What do you remember of it?
Yes. So after that year out, I did do some part-time works, but it's not the same as that monthly salary. That's, that big chunk of money.
Yeah.
So when that comes in, and when I got my first graduate job, there was a lot of money that I needed to spend up front, because I was moving to a different town as well. So, I was moving to kind of Cheltenham, Gloucester area. So, a number of miles away from where I am. And so you have to put down the deposit and everything. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm putting down, money to rent a place and all the bills and whatnot. You're already like spending before you've even earned anything. And I think that's one thing that people may forget, is that, yeah, sometimes we're going to have to just for your job, you might need to go there and spend a little bit before you've even got that salary. But yeah, once that salary came in, I think as a young person, as a young professional, you want to enjoy it, blow it a little bit, know, oh, I'm going to go on holiday. I'm going to go and do this, that. I'm going to get an expensive gym membership. And you start like thinking that, oh, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And I think it's important to enjoy it. I think when I think about it in hindsight, I'm glad that I did some of the things that I did. I did organize a holiday with my friend. We went to Iceland. Iceland wasn't very cheap, but, we saved up for it. Both she and I, we got our first jobs, and we're like, no, let's go. And I think it's just having that idea and starting to think about, okay, well, how can I budget for things? Initially, you don't feel like it's like, oh my gosh, I've got money in the account now. But equally, you see it go down quite quickly, and you start understanding, actually, I feel like I'm waiting for my salary month to month. And that's when you start understanding, oh, I don't want to have that feeling of like, I'm, waiting for that. And then you start kind of understanding, okay, right, I need to budget a little bit. I need to put a little bit over on the side there, a little bit there, making sure that you're putting things towards your pension or some investments as well. Because I think I started a little bit later on that, but that was because I was learning as I was going as well.
Yeah. So do you have any advice for those initial years, how to, I mean, not budget, but what to do with your money in case, if you have to think back, do you have any advice, or would you have done anything different?
Yeah, I think I'm obviously a lot better with it now than I was back then, but that's obviously in hindsight. And I definitely would say pay yourself a little bit, that money that you have, that guilt-free money. And even if it's £50, £100, if you can do that, like just put that aside and be like, right, I can spend that on anything I want. And then and now these kind of apps are great now, where you can have your buckets. So I was like, okay, I've got buckets for grocery, buckets for investing. I've got a bucket for emergency. I'm only going to touch that when I really need to. And I think building that habit, I think in hindsight, when I think about the opportunities that we have now and those buckets that we had, because I don't think that was there when I first started. And I think that would be amazing and great to do, because then, okay, I'm going to go out on a Friday night. That's my bucket for the month, if you're going paycheck to paycheck. And then that actually I've got plenty now. You're not working to paycheck to paycheck. You're like,
Right.
okay, I've got some money aside. If anything emergency happens, I've got some emergency funds and that kind of thing. And I didn't actually learn that until I kind of was reading a couple of books and things as I was going through my journey of, just, oh, okay, I've got this salary. Now what do I do? So yeah.
Wonderful. So, getting into the first job that you were in, if you can talk about that experience of how was that different from how it was in university? And what did it feel like having that regular 9 to 5 kind of working environment? How was it for you? For the initial couple of years, I would say.
Yeah. So when I went into my first job, it was a graduate job. So, and it was with Horizon Nuclear Power. So they were building a new power station, and incredible people, incredible environment. And when you go in as a fresh graduate, they really do take care of you. So, you will go in, you will have your training courses, and they'll bring you up to speed with that. And I think one thing to understand is that you may not always be in the area of that, in that company that you really, really want to be in. You might start off in an area that you're like, oh, this is not what I wanted to do. But I think when you think about it in hindsight, you actually, it is worth knowing that, because as you get to the place where I'm in from a strategic point of view, and you have to look at things holistically, you're like, oh yeah, I did, this training aspect that I was like, oh, I don't know how to do training, like I don't understand this. But actually, when I look back on it, I was like, no, it's really important that I did that, because I was also helping apprentices. As a graduate, I was helping apprentices to learn, for them to learn, and then that importance of almost giving back, So I'm a graduate, I'm helping apprentices, and then you've got managers and they're helping you, and it's that chain. And so that in that first year, I was already learning that as well. And the other aspect is just being able to network. And I think a lot of graduates probably struggle to kind of network in some cases, because they're like, oh, I'm meant to go speak to someone and, ask them. And actually it's quite normal now to go up to someone, hey, can I have 5 minutes with you? I just want to understand what you're doing, and what your role is. I'm very new to this. And most, I think 10 times out of 10, I'm sure most people are very helpful, especially when you're quite new and in that first year. So, and I think the one thing that as a graduate that people should ask for is that training. What training courses can I go on? Because those are the things where, one, you meet a lot of people, but two, quite early on, you can kind of get some like certifications under your belt as well and get an understanding. So whether that.
Yeah. My question to you here is, if you can explain the job part of it, like what were your responsibilities like in the initial years, and how did you, like you've explained, you learned, you asked questions, you learned from others, you did trainings, but what was your actually job profile was like?
Sure. Yeah. So I was in the operations area for the building of the nuclear power station. So we were looking at the operational side of things. And so my initial job that I had was in the training team and understanding, well, how are we going to train people up? So that is very outside of like that engineering aspect, but there is that element of how do we teach people about nuclear and nuclear science and nuclear physics? And it's understanding how do we articulate that. So I was actually working on that, and that actually helped with my understanding by writing of how we're going to teach other people. I was able to do that. And then on top of that, you look at other aspects in terms of, I then moved into the electrical engineering side of things, and that had a human factors side of things. So you look at requirements. So it's almost systems engineering, the requirements for a control system, a control room where you have the operators, they're sat there, they're looking at all of the instruments, is the reactor doing okay? Are we all okay? Are we safe? And there's a whole set of requirements for that control room. So I was working on that, looking through that, building that up. There was also the opportunity, because I was doing that and we were looking at the design of that design needed to go to the government, and that was the generic design assessment, to make sure that we can actually build this nuclear power station, as a generic design before you kind of go into like the detailed design. And the government then kind of the Office of Nuclear Regulation, they see, okay, no, everything from a safety aspect, it looks like it would work. And then you kind of get that certification from them. So I was working on that. And through that, I was actually able to go to Japan because we were working with Hitachi, and with that, the Japanese had already built that specific nuclear power station. So you're able to go and see and look at their control system and understanding from a human factors point of view. And that's a completely another element of kind of engineering that you probably don't get taught it really at university. There is a human factors course, a degree that people can go to.
Yes.
But it was a new element for me. So you understand, okay, well, how does the human mind work as well? And I was looking at that and comparing actually what would the Japanese do compared to what we in England would do. And so there was that element of it. So not only the requirements, but the people aspect, how do people react in an emergency response as well? So there's a few elements there, and it was very, there was some practical aspects to it where you are leading in meetings. And I think some people kind of think about, I'm just going into a meeting and I'm just taking notes. Actually, I think that's probably one of the most important things as a graduate. You might think, why am I going into a meeting and taking notes? But it actually helps you, one, understand and articulate what people are talking about. And as you go through your career, you'll be able to pick up the key points very, very quickly and articulate it and present it out. So those are some aspects that I did. There's also kind of report writing and technical write-ups as well, talking about how a specific system works. So I was looking at the turbines that kind of the nuclear power station like turns the turbines to create the electricity. So looking at how that works from a chemical point of view, from a mechanical point of view as well. And I think that's important also to point out, is that we're not just doing process engineering and chemical engineering. You actually look at other aspects of like mechanical engineering, because I think, as I said, as an engineer, you can actually pick up on lots of different types of engineering.
Yeah, I can already see that you have mentioned chemical engineering, you've mentioned mechanical, you've mentioned electrical engineering in your description, and I'm sure other aspects which go into building a nuclear power plant. You've also touched upon that during your work period. What I think would be intriguing for anyone listening, I have one question to start with, and then I'll go to the other. If you can explain, what is human factor for any layman?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So human factors, you look at, and I think the easiest way for me to describe it, because I'm also not the professional in that, as I said, there are degrees that people go and do this, but you look at it from a human psychological perspective in terms of how is a human going to react in a certain situation? What decisions are they going to make? How are they going to read a specific dial as well? So if we talk about say like an emergency response, and there's an operator sat in their chair, and it's like, right, there's an emergency response. What is the human actually going to go and press that kind of that button there, the red button, kind of two buttons there to be like, right, we've got to stop this and make the reactor safe. And they're going to go look at the different instruments, and the instruments might have different colored lighting as well. And so when you look at different lights will mean different things. And so again, it's understanding and putting that psychological and understanding, okay, when that light goes on and that color, I know what's happening. I know exactly what's happening. And it's to help the human essentially make their decisions and make things safe as well. So, and with that as well, there might be a process. So you might be right, okay, we're going to need to write a process. And when a human factor specialist looks at that process, they'll say, right, if I was reading this, where, will I end up doing the right thing? Or actually, do we need to tweak the wording for like the understanding for an operator, for anyone coming in, and I think that's probably the best way to put it.
I get it. At least on a very basic level, we try and understand these terminologies so that anyone who's listening, and if they get interested into it, they can dig deeper and do their own research and pursue it if they want to. So that's why I thought it was important for us to explain that. My follow on question, the second question that I thought I'll ask you is, in a nuclear power, you saw it building up from the beginning. Yeah. You were part of the initial days of that particular nuclear plant. If you can briefly explain, how does this whole work go on? Even though you might have focused on, the training bit of it, you would have seen things happening. So I think that would be an interesting conversation for us to, for anyone who's listening, they would know what goes into building a nuclear power plant from a very top level.
Yeah. I think first to put the caveat that that actual power plant didn't get built because it's very expensive to build some of those nuclear power reactors. And, that's one of the things that the government are looking at now in terms of having a more optimized version. So they have the small modular reactors so that you can build them in a modular scale. But in terms of the question that you asked, oh my gosh, so many aspects that you have to look at. And I think the first thing, and quite an interesting part of it, is, well, where are we going to build this nuclear power station? We've got this site, that site. You have greenfield sites, you have brownfield sites, so greenfield being never being built on, brownfield sites where, there's been buildings there, or it might have been a previous power plant, or it may have been one that's being decommissioned, and then we can kind of use the land in and around it as well. So then when you look at the land and where it's going to be built, then you think about, okay, well, is there water around there, in terms of cooling for the nuclear reactor? Is there you look at the wildlife as well, and people kind of forget about the environment side of things. And within that industry, and I worked on the development consent order, which is essentially the planning permission for the nuclear power station, is looking at, okay, well, are we doing the right thing in terms of the water aspect of things, and making sure that, the toxicity or anything, like you don't want to have any of that. You want to make sure that you're putting across to the government, nothing's, going bad in that sense. You look at the kind of wildlife around there. If we're going to have to move wildlife or set up new habitats for them, and that's quite interesting as well. You'll have barn owls, you might have bats, there are places, and they're all kind of protected species. So I think that's an element that you don't think that, as an engineer, that you'd go and work on, but actually it's so important to know what goes on in that side of things. And then when you kind of start thinking about the nuclear power station itself, you start looking at concrete, but the big thing that they have is like, right, when is the first concrete being put down to have that kind of foundation for it as well. So you're working with civil engineers, looking at the infrastructure side of things. And then you think about, okay, well, we're going to have to also connect to the power grid. Okay, so now we're going to be working with another company that actually manages the power grid. And so now how are we going to connect into that? And how much are we allowed to put in? And how much, where would we, we have to look at the power of the power station itself. So there's so many elements that look into that. And I think the other side of that you think about this is, obviously I mentioned the financing side of things, and the government and the Office of Nuclear Regulation. So there are lots of parties that you need to work with that is really important here. And particularly that regular communication with the government as well, in terms of that, because obviously we're talking about nuclear power. There's a security aspect around it as well. So I think there's so many elements that you have to think as an engineer.
Yeah, no, at least we have an overview of some of the aspects that you could bring to the table for us to know that, okay, these are the aspects that comes into play when we are building a nuclear power plant. Well, you progressed, and that's how you have gained so much of knowledge. So from your initial days to work where you were working in training and, the initial operational job, how did you progress? How did your profile progress?
Yeah. So in terms of the graduate job, so that was kind of 18 months long. So you kind of do, 6 months to a year in a particular role, and you get to move around. After the 18 months were up, so I moved, into we had like the nuclear island. So there was like the nuclear actual reactor team that were looking at the nuclear reactor. And then we had the turbine island, which was looking at the turbine side of things. So I was able to move around and work with those people, also looked at risk and how do you manage risk. And after those 18 months, my home team was the operations team. And so for them, then I moved on and started looking at commissioning and, how are we going to commission the plant and how are we going to kind of move it from inactive to active commissioning and writing the strategy for that. And you have to remember this was so early on as well that I was still learning at the time. And then from that, so because as I already mentioned, building a nuclear power station, it's especially that big, it takes a lot of time, effort, finances. You need investment in there. And over time, like I came to understand, okay, this may not happen and this may not go ahead. And so I decided, someone actually approached me on LinkedIn to say, would you be open to another opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously as a graduate, you're like, oh, okay, this might be quite good. And, I've just finished a graduate job and someone's offering me another job. With that, you get more responsibility. You will most likely get a pay rise as well. And I thought, okay, after 18 months, almost pretty much it became 2 years, I was like, that's a good time actually to now let's think of the next step, particularly as I knew that, okay, this is not really going to go ahead now. So let's think about the other side of things. So then I actually moved into safety cases, which is actually something that we didn't really touch on, which is also a major part of not only the power stations, but, even in the petrochemical industry and most kind of processing facilities, those safety cases are quite important. And if you want me to, I can explain what safety case. So safety case, the way that I actually explain it is like you're trying to provide evidence to anyone reading that why your plant is safe. I'd almost call it, you're almost a lawyer for the plant itself, being like, this plant is safe because of X, Y, and Z. And so you make a case that this particular area or this plant is safe, and it builds up. So you might have it over a component or a particular system, and then you end up building it up to a whole facility, and you can end up having a facility safety case. So you kind of look at, okay, that this is safe, and then you provide the evidence as well and the justification, and you kind of have that kind of set out, like, this is what I'm kind of claiming, here's the evidence, and this is why, kind of thing. So you build that into, essentially, it's usually a document, and they're very big documents. And then it kind of results in some safety functional requirements, which then kind of help with the design and the engineering aspect of things as well. It's quite tough to kind of wrap your head around, but I think when you just kind of say it in simple terms, that you're just making a case of why a certain component or a certain system or a certain facility is safe, and why is it safe and how.
Yeah.
And if it's not safe, and if you do your calculations from a nuclear perspective, it might be kind of radiation. Okay, so what mitigations do we have? Have we got shielding and that side of things as well?
And a lot of government policies would be also considered while making these safety cases, right? Because, of course, the primary guidelines come from the government, is what I
Absolutely.
understand. And then, of course, you put your brains together to figure out this particular facility is safe or not, and following all the guidelines or not, is what I'm assuming. Correct me if I'm
Yes. So the ONR, the Office of Nuclear Regulation, they'll have their kind of guidelines. And in the UK specifically, we have this term in terms of as low as reasonably practicable. So a LARP. And that kind of looks at it from a holistic view in terms of, okay, well, if we're going to spend this much, how much are we going to actually reduce the risk? And if we're spending too much, but we're not reducing the risk as much, then you have to make that practical decision in terms of, well, is it worth it? Can we do something else or something a little bit cheaper to reduce that risk? And it doesn't always have to be that mechanical or actual physical component. There's something that they call kind of ERIC PD, so kind of eliminate, reduce, and everything else. I won't really remember all of them, but the first thing is to eliminate. You try and eliminate the risk and the hazard to reduce that. And so there are calculations there as well, and quite a lot of the times the clients or the companies, like, they will have their kind of tolerances, because not only do you have to think about the workers, but you also have to think about the public as well. And I think that's quite important from, from a nuclear perspective in any environment in that, and even in the petrochemical side of things, what's that environmental impact going to be as well, to the public, to the workers as well. So
Right. Were you trained to think this way in terms of safety, or did you all acquire it on the job?
So interestingly, during my chemical engineering degree, we touched on this. We touched on kind of hazard and operability studies, how you would look at piping and instrumentation diagrams and carry out those hazards, where identifying those hazards, and that process. But it was obviously that was more in a theoretical kind of, this is how we do it. And obviously they do it as real as possible. And then when you move into something like safety case, it triggers a few things from university, but ultimately there are processes. And I think that's something that people forget, actually. And it's worth mentioning, is that every company, there are processes to follow, and particularly when it's high hazard industries, every company will have a process to follow of this is how we actually do our safety cases, and this is what you'll need to produce. You'll need to produce this strategy, this document, and these calculations, and this is how you do the calculations. And they're quite prescriptive, but then you can also give your case of, actually, we don't need to do it this way because it's a little bit more simpler than that. So as long as you can make that case of, actually, we're deviating a little bit away from the process, you don't have to remember everything in your head. And I think that's really important to remember, is that, from university times or you don't have to remember everything, because you can ask, obviously, the people around you, but equally, you've got the processes there. There are guidelines there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for sharing that in so much detail. It's making the conversation very interesting for me, and I'm sure for all the listeners who are with us till this point.
Yeah.
I'm sure they'll enjoy to know of an industry which we rarely talk about in our circles, or, very few people know people who work in the nuclear industry. So
Yeah.
well done to be in this industry. And, I'm really happy that we are talking about it in this reading. That was a part of Poonam's story, just the first part. Her story reminds us people are never just one thing. You can be analytical and creative, ambitious and compassionate, an engineer and a pageant queen. The real lesson from her journey is not about the crown or the title. It's about having the courage to step beyond what feels comfortable and discover what else you're capable of. To discover her journey from nuclear industry to beauty pageant queen, stay tuned. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who's exploring their future or considering a new challenge in life. And if you're new to Unblur the Path, do subscribe. Every new subscriber helps us bring more inspiring professionals and real career stories to students and families around the world. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep unblurring the path ahead.